One of our favorite guests, Dr. Todd Ovokaitys, joins us again in today's episode. Dr. Todd helps us better understand the direct relationship between energy and frequency, how we can literally turn back the biological aging clock, and he explains what the matrix actually is and how we can get out of it and live a much larger, more meaningful life. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on the Inspire Health podcast as we continue on with our series on energy, frequency, vibration, magnetics, the next era of healthcare. And today, surprise, surprise, we bring back Dr. Todd again. So if you've checked out their last few series, Dr. Todd has been a guest on each one of them. And it's because he knows so much stuff. He is definitely one of the gurus, I think, that has been able to bridge science and spirituality and amalgamated these things so profoundly. And every time we talk to Dr. Todd, he just amazes me at the depth of knowledge that he has and the wisdom that he's able to impart on our guests. So we were really excited to be able to have him back again and pick his brain even more on some of this concept around energy, frequency, vibration, magnetics, etc. So we get into a lot of different pieces today, and the conversation kind of moves around a fair bit. But he also brings back sort of the physics of what's actually going on when we talk about things like energy and frequency, and how when frequency goes up, energy is increased. And he kind of breaks this stuff down for us. We talk about consciousness related to frequency, and we talk about some of the photoacoustic laser technology that he's created, that he's used both in agriculture and in the supplement industry, and how he's literally been able to turn back the biological aging clock using these things. It's really quite phenomenal. We talk about the idea of the love frequency, or the field of love, and how that relates to frequency and what that actually means. And we even later on get into talking a bit about the actual matrix. Like, what do we mean when we talk about being in this matrix? And more importantly, how is that keeping us small? And what is required in order to actually get out of the matrix? So hang on till the end of this interview. I think Dr. Todd's a wealth of information, and he shares so much with us each time that we get to speak with him. So I hope you enjoy this. Now, if you haven't had a chance, I would like to thank our sponsors, C60 from Purple Power and Ascent Nutrition. If you haven't had a chance to check them out, click the link below and you'll get 15% off your order from C60 and 10% off your order from Ascent Nutrition. Now, C60 from Purple Power, again, that incredibly powerful antioxidant. It's literally this soccer ball shaped antioxidant that has this unique way of sequestering up free radicals and helping to rid them from the body. And ultimately, that helps us optimize our oxidative load and inflammation in the body that can play big roles in the root to almost all illness. So getting that stuff under control is a really big deal. I really like the specific products from C60 from Purple Power because they're third-party tested. So they have a lab that assures you that what is in the product is actually in it. They are sublimated C60, and they have 99.99% pure sublimated C60 that is never exposed to solvents. Some companies use solvents to extract their core ingredients, and that actually can cause damage in other ways to the body. They use 100% organic oils. So the carrier oil that holds the C60 is either going to be MCT oil, olive oil, or avocado oil, and they use 100% organic. They are FDA compliant, GMP certified facility, and they offer free shipping throughout the US. So check them out. They're a wonderful company. With Ascent Nutrition, if you haven't checked them out, Ascent Nutrition is a really phenomenal company as well that has an array of amazing health products. One of the things that I think everybody should check out right now, which actually was kind of funny because we talked about their immune booster formula at one time, and that specifically got the fulvic acid, or the humic acid, that has a high amount of fulvic acid in it, as well as L-lysine. And it's someone asking me before that you talked about the folic acid, and I couldn't find where they had their folic acid. I had to explain again that it's not folic acid, it's fulvic acid. This is different. Humic acid can be very rich in fulvic acid, and fulvic acid is actually one of the most powerful antioxidants that we can find. And humic acid and fulvic acid also act as the nature's sort of garbage person. They help to clean up and detoxify the body. They can pick up a lot of contaminants that we get exposed to, a lot of different toxins, and remove a lot of the cellular waste. This is paramount when we are trying to maintain wellness and resilience to disease. So check out their product called Immune Booster. Make sure that you use the promo code DRLOKEN for Ascent as well as for C60, and they will get a discount on your order. All right, everybody, thanks so much. And let me know what you think about this episode. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. And we continue on with our series on energy, frequency, vibration, and magnetics, the next era of healthcare. And surprise, surprise, we had to bring Dr. Todd back again because he's one of our favorites. And I think, like I've mentioned before, I feel like nobody should have as many brain cells as Dr. Todd does, and it should be shared more widely throughout the world because the guy's just insanely brilliant in so many different areas. True. And every time we listen to more of his information, we just keep thinking, holy cow, it's like, and I was saying this the other day, Dr. Todd, when we were listening to one of your episodes where you were breaking down some of the work that you're doing with the laser technology that you've created. And I was saying, I think why Dr. Todd also taps into so much brilliance is because you've got such a degree of openness and curiosity that never really seems like it holds you back too much. I mean, I feel like you bridge the worlds of science and metaphysics and spirituality better than anybody I've come across.
And with so much heart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the heart's always there. And that's, I think what drives the mission. And, but I think it's just fascinating because you effortlessly find a way to bridge these different worlds. And I think it's what allows us to keep insights, keep coming in. And then you use the scientific part of things to try and validate what you're doing, but you never let that be the limiting sort of structure around it. You remain open to lots of different insights and then try to pull them into a way that you can validate it. So, I mean, Dr. Todd's a medical doctor. He's created pineal tones. He's created this amazing photoacoustic laser that we'll talk about today a little bit. All the work that you've done in the mind-body spiritual spectrum with the biological decoding work. We've had Dr. Todd on. This is the third series that he's been a part of. So he's been in our Science, Mysticism, and Beyond, our trauma series, and now this series because there's just so much information. And Dr. Todd, thank you so much for being a part of our series again.
Always a great pleasure. Thank you so much for your comments. And I think the topic today really kind of ties together why all those disparate areas really are fundamentally connected, because it's ultimately about frequency and vibration, whatever the field.
Mm-hmm. That's our belief too. So why don't we start off, why don't you give us an overview? I'm asking a lot of the guests to explain from their perspective, energy, frequency, vibration, just a bit of a definition as far as what that means from your perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, we particularly work in the area of light. And there are some basic formulas in physics that probably you and many of your listeners learned. And it's really nice working with photons because it really demonstrates certain principles. So what's useful about a photon is that it travels at the speed of light, so its speed is constant. And the only thing that will really change about it is its frequency and potentially how it's modulated for further refinement of information. If we just stick with the very basics, you have a wavelength of light. It can have a longer or shorter frequency. And we've all been familiar with a rainbow, and at one end we have the violet, at the middle we have the green, and at the other end we have the red. And each of those has an explicit frequency. And I'll share a little physics for those that want that part of it. So simply, the energy of a photon equals the frequency times Planck's constant. So E equals H, which is Planck's constant, which is a factor someone can just look up because that's universal throughout the physics world. and frequency. So basically, that basically says that the higher the frequency that the photon is vibrating at, the greater the energy. And that goes across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, not just the visible. So extremely low frequency waves that along have very little energy per wave. Microwaves are higher and there's more energy per wave. Radio frequency is higher. Then we get to the visible spectrum, which is higher. Ultraviolet is higher, and then X-rays are higher than that, and cosmic rays are higher than that. So the higher the frequency, the greater the energy. And when we look at the visible spectrum, where we explicitly tie a particular wavelength to the color and the frequency, the other way of expressing that formula, that energy equals Planck's constant times the frequency, is to multiply h times the speed of light over lambda, which is the wavelength. So that equation, h equals hc over lambda, basically is saying that the speed of light is constant and it's over the wavelength. So basically, the shorter the wavelength, the greater the amount of energy in each of the photons. That starts giving us some general principles. The faster things vibrate, the more energy that's there. The faster things vibrate, the more they move up the electromagnetic spectrum. Things move from the red end of the spectrum to the violet end of the spectrum to ultraviolet and beyond. So when we get into the concept of frequency, the general principle is if the speed of the wave is constant, the higher the frequency, the greater the energy. So that's just the general concept of the energy relationship between the frequency of a wave. It can be acoustic as well. So sound, of course, is a different kind of wave. It's a pressure wave as opposed to a transverse electromagnetic wave. And yet there is still a power associated with that, which is more the amplitude of the pressure wave. So the principles are a little bit different there, but similarly, there is a relationship between the level of the pressure wave and the frequency of that wave. So for a given amount of pressure, the higher the frequency, the more energy is going to be there. So that's just the general relationship between frequency and energy. And our greater interest really has to do with the concept of resonance, that everything in the universe vibrates. And one of the most amazing revelations I had in my early study of physics, even in grade school, was the concept of natural frequency. And maybe that came in 8th grade. Maybe it wasn't until I was studying physics in high school. But I remember the profundity of this concept that every single structure, no matter how small, like as small as a bond between two atoms, to a crystal wine glass, to a skyscraper, to an entire planet, everything that has physical structure vibrates. And a characteristic of what it's composed of and its geometry is something called the natural frequency, which means if you give a stimulus to that system, it will tend to vibrate at a particular frequency, its fundamental frequency. And that will also set the harmonic intervals related to that frequency. So the basic idea of resonance. So let's say we have a tuning fork, and we won't get into the whole argument about whether the true A is 440 or 432 or 444. Let's just stick with a basic A at 440, that if we strike it, it will ring. And what's really interesting, because most people don't hear this term, there's a physics concept called a Dirac. And a Dirac is like a spike of very high energy that has all manner of frequencies and almost an infinite range of frequencies. So when you hit a bell or you strike a tuning fork, you're literally applying a Dirac to it. So the tuning fork selects out of all those frequencies that are in that spike, the exact one that is tuned to its natural frequency. So you hit the tuning fork, it starts vibrating at 440, and that sets up a vibration. And if there's a tuning fork at 440, or a piano string or a guitar string at 440, because it is vibrating at the same resonance, at the same natural frequency, it will cause anything that is in resonance to start to vibrate as well. So when we talk about resonance, we're literally talking about a frequency attunement, whether it's an acoustic sound wave or it's an electromagnetic wave of light or outside of the visible spectrum, either higher frequency or lower frequency, and or simply mechanical waves. Everything that is in a function of having a natural frequency, it will be capable to stimulate that system by using frequency that is either at the natural frequency or is a harmonic of it. So then we actually start getting into what are called the harmonic intervals. So if A is 440, well, we have another A that's at half the frequency at 220, and another A that's at half the frequency at 110. And those are called subharmonics if it's below the natural frequency. And it is possible, if you play the subharmonics, eventually to drive the fundamental frequency. It may be very slow and it may eventually happen. And the principle is that it's actually much higher to drive the fundamental with the higher harmonics. So you have an A at 880, you have an A at 1760, you have an A at 3520. And if you hit a frequency that's higher than the fundamental frequency, because there's more energy there, you can also, if you rang an 880 note and had a 440 tuning fork, you would stimulate the 440 tuning fork with the higher harmonic.
That's so interesting. What it made me think of, I don't have the same training as neither of you, but as you were explaining that, I've heard a lot, especially from the Indigenous community, that everything has a consciousness. And when you were speaking of everything in the universe vibrates, and everything that has physical structure also vibrates, then what is the relationship between vibration and consciousness?
Mm-hmm. That gets into the next question, and it's a great question, thank you, that even energy in all its forms has frequency and vibration. So if you start looking at fundamental physics, where you have this whole zoo of particles and particle names and subatomic particles, that the particles are specified by the amount of energy, and the amount of energy translates to a particular frequency that a photon will have to actually match that particular energy. So even at the level of fundamental physics, things are vibrating, and the rate of vibration relates to the amount of energy that's present. So when we go outside the realm of a physical structure, like we have a bell and it has characteristics when we're going to hit it, and we want to see what kind of a beautiful bell sound it makes. So hit a tuning fork and see what specific frequency it makes. And that's all based on the geometric structure, the shape, what it's made of, and even the internal composition of it. When we get to energy, it's subtler. But energy at every level still will have frequency and intensity domains. And I would liken consciousness, and often as we speak about DNA and the deeper levels of the way it works, I would liken consciousness more to the metaphor of a radio station that has a transmitter and a receiver. And in antenna theory, if you shift the polarity, you say have a station, one antenna transmits, the other receives, you can shift the polarity so a receiver becomes a transmitter and a transmitter becomes a receiver. So there's this mutual communication. So if I get into consciousness, like very subtle questions, like you're thinking of a friend all of a sudden, and just as you're thinking about them, the phone rings. So the question is, was there some sort of communication from that point of consciousness to your point of consciousness? At another level, we won't get into the discussion of how it's possible or if it really is true. There are people who have what they would describe as telepathic experiences, where they can be halfway around the world and literally hear a communication as though that person is in the room. And here again, I believe we will have the same principle of frequency and resonance, but I believe it's happening at a much higher frequency domain. And if we suppose that the brain and all its neurons and all its fluctuations, and actually each DNA molecule can be described in a way as a type of antenna that transmits and receives information from all the other DNA, that collective structure combined with your awareness, which supersedes all of that, has a vibratory pattern that you can tune. So if you're really aligned with someone, you have a heart connection, a body, mind, being type of connection, and you want to communicate, you can imagine that just as two antennas can be tuned to each other, two brains and points of consciousness can be in tune with each other. And there still, I believe, is going to be an energy of consciousness, a frequency and vibration of consciousness, and an attuning of consciousness that will allow communication between, I would say, any 2 points of sentience. So it can be, the person, you and a pet. We can postulate that there are other intelligent beings in the universe, potentially communication with that. We can, having three-dimensional scientific proof, because we don't have the instruments for it, we can postulate that there are other dimensions and realities where there can be intelligences that reside that we may communicate with, that we perhaps tune into in meditation. And it's all about getting into a still point. It's all about tuning your awareness to whatever the vibrational state and characteristics are of that other realm or sentience that we'd like to communicate with. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
It looks like only partially.
No. It's one of those things, Dr. Todd. I feel like with the information that you convey, it's one of those things that I need to actually sit with it and listen to it again. It does land, but I oftentimes get surprised in the ways in which it presents itself in my knowings after the fact. But so what I'm understanding is that there's communication going on between structures or between beings or all that there is around us.
Right.
And
that's further,
how,
you can you can broadly categorize it as between transmitters and receivers, which can switch roles as you alter the polarization state of the system.
Hmm.
One thing that I'm really curious about is when you were talking about natural frequency, when you resonate something, or when something resonates back at its natural frequency, does it literally then almost like bring it back to its original blueprint? So if something has been distorted or altered or whatever might have happened, or in disease when cells start to get unhealthy, when you resonate something back at its original natural frequency, is there a literally like a bringing back, almost a clear slate again, like bringing it back to its original blueprint? It makes me think a little bit about when we've heard like Huna Flash talk about bringing back to first light. You know, we'll talk about bringing it back to undistorted light is what he would call it. And then that's sort of what we're trying to do, is always bring things back to undistorted light, which is sort of that really clear original essence of who we are. Is that what we're doing on some regard when we resonate with our natural frequency?
That's a great question. And I will answer that. And then I'll also address the actual principle of resonance and building energy when you match the frequency. So our best physical example of the question you're asking is, if you create a frequency pattern that is in resonance with the natural frequency, the native original state of that system, can you restore it back to its original state without distortion? And where we have an example of that is the work we do with nutritional supplements. And we've done X-ray crystallography on a molecule called L-arginine. And that's one of the 20 amino acids that are in the proteins that we eat. And it became very famous in 1998 when the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for work around arginine-derived nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is an extraordinary molecule that is involved in learning and memory, and dilating our blood vessels, maintaining normal blood pressure, keeping our arteries safe, supporting immune function, allowing GI function, and so forth. And we did an experiment where we crystallized the arginine just in ordinary conditions without the laser. And then we crystallize it using the laser with a frequency pattern that was in resonance with the overall structure. And what's interesting is, of all the amino acids, it has the longest side chain. And we could do a different lecture about amino acids and the chemical structure and why there's 20 of them in the categories they fit into. The simplest statement is that all amino acids have the same core structure, and then they have a side chain, and the side chain is what gives them their unique characteristics. And arginine has a very long side chain that has a lot of nitrogen in it. And because it has a long side chain that isn't constrained by double bonds, that the side chain can bend, it can twist, it can fold over. And in processing, there can be many distortions in shape. So you can start out with this beautiful elongated side chain, but by the time it's through its various procedures for extracting it and making it into an ingredient, it may have a lot of distortions in its shape. And what we found when we crystallized the arginine by slow evaporation under the influence of the laser, the X-ray crystallography showed we'd created this beautiful uniform field where all the side chains were perfectly elongated and parallel to each other. So in essence, we had used resonance to literally vibrate along the backbone structure and untwist and elongate and flatten and homogenize the molecules so that they were back in their ideal original state to work with the enzyme and systems of the body, and had a very uniform original state configuration. So that's an example of that principle.
That's beautiful. where I was thinking about it too is I think from a human being perspective, what makes sense to me is that our natural frequency would be the setting of pure love. Because I also think pure love probably is a unique frequency for each individual. So it's probably not something you can completely maybe create. Maybe you can, but I'm thinking, I know for me, when I feel like I am maybe resonating at that natural frequency of pure love, I feel something very specific inside my body. And then I think it has to translate into how are you living that in the world? And I'm wondering if we are doing something along those lines, if that is setting up the almost resetting our blueprint, or even maybe
Or
that frequency, is a remembering. And I'm wondering if that's relating to some of the changes that might be taking place with DNA. And maybe we can segue into that, your thoughts around that, and then tying into DNA and moving on that direction.
Well, let's not get too complex or too philosophically deep here.
That would be totally out of practice.
Well, that's an amazing question. And before we get there, I'd like to talk a little bit about how resonance works, because it's related to the answer to that question, how a system resets when you recalibrate it at a higher vibration. In a system that has a natural frequency, will be disposed to be ready to accept energy at that particular frequency. And Tesla, who couldn't really help himself, I guess, did an experiment where he made a little tiny mechanical oscillator that he tuned to the natural frequency of the support structures in the building he was in. And then he strapped this little oscillator to a foundation support beam. And there's this little tiny impulse that was going off. It started building the energy in this whole apartment building higher and higher, to the point that the walls were shaking, the windows were breaking out, and ultimately the authorities come in and force him to stop his little oscillator. And it just demonstrated the principle that what happens with resonance is that you can have very tiny impulses, very low energy impulses, but if they're at the right frequency, each time there's an impulse, there'll be a little bit more energy, a little bit more energy, and a little bit more energy in that system until you reach the point of full resonance. And that point of full resonance is when the input energy coming in is exactly balanced by the damping factors in the system, the friction in the system, and other factors that will cause some dissipation of that. And when those two factors are equal, and there's actually a term called Q, or quality of resonance, which is the number of cycles of input that it takes to bring the system to full resonance. Now, sometimes the energy builds in a system to such a great level that it doesn't cap off. It actually has so much energy, the system literally explodes. Like when the opera singer hits the tone of the crystal wine glass and the structure can't accommodate the degree which energy builds, and simply shatters. And there was an amazing video, which you may have seen, I believe it was the Verrazano narrow straight bridge, where the wind was gusting at the natural frequency of the bridge, and you saw the bridge start to undulate, and then the waves got even bigger and deeper, and you saw cars are still driving and trying to keep on the bridge, and finally they stopped coming because they saw what was going on, and eventually the bridge just collapsed. So resonance can actually overdrive a structure until it will shatter, or it will just rise to a peak where the input energy balances how it dissipates through frictional and radiative losses and other losses. And then that's the peak of resonance, when the system is in full resonance. And that principle is the case across the board, whether it's antenna theory, whether it's getting the vibration of a bond in a molecule, which is what we are often working with, what we're doing with lasers. And then we can take it to this subtle question about getting into the love vibration. I haven't really thought about it that way before, so I think we're kind of brainstorming this on the fly here, that we have a sense for what is the love vibration. Like when we're in a relaxed state, when we let the cares of the day dissipate away from us, when we're not concerned about one thing or other in the practicum of everyday requirements and activities, that getting into that pure state of being, that love state, is a vibration that really is expansive. It's kind of all-encompassing. And I believe that getting into that state, as you say, will create a reset. I mean, it'll reset everything that you're doing in a high vibrational state, and it will recalibrate everything in terms of what could be called a magnetic attractor field. And when I say that, I'd like to give credit probably to someone you've discussed on the show before, which would be Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote the landmark book called Power versus Force. And he described the concept that there is a calibrated scale of consciousness, and he made the scale from 1 to 1,000, and every 1 point increase isn't just a little bit, it's actually an order of magnitude, and that the love vibration was quite high in the scale, and that everyone has what he calls a magnetic attractor field, which is where someone's calibration set point is. And you can have a good day and you can be calibrating higher, or a challenging day and the calibration be low, but you have a set point. And so I believe that there is a process of relieving those things that are blocks to fully being in and expressing the love vibration. And the more and more you can do that, the more you relieve those so-called damping or blocking factors, that the more and more someone can get to their actual set point, just being in the love vibration. And then everything recalibrates around that. How you experience the world, what you think, what you say, how people feel around you, what you attract to yourself, and all things related to how like vibrations attract and resonate.
Yeah, I think that's just, I mean, to me, it's all really fascinating. And even when you were talking about how with Tesla, and it just needs to be like little impulses, but over time, it creates more and more energy into the system. It makes me think about just why it's important to even have a practice where you periodically keep putting that vibration into your system, so to speak, or that frequency into your system. You do different things that connect you to that feeling of whether it's love or appreciation, whatever it might be. But I like the idea that you're always building. It doesn't have to be a massive event. We tend to like to think most things need to be big events, but it's more like the consistency of the frequency that seems to make the impact.
And in the world of yoga, they talk about really needing to take care of your vessel, so that if you do get that surge of energy or Kundalini rising, your vessel or the clay is hardened enough for it to be able to contain the energy. And we've commonly heard of, when people do get that surge of energy from base chakra moving up, that oftentimes people can have serious mental breakdown issues because they haven't done the work to be able to hold and anchor that energy that's being released within the body. It also makes me think of what's currently going on within this shift in humanity that we're all going through. In the book that I was reading, I think it was book 14 of Kryon, he speaks of this current shift, and he speaks of our Earth, our planet, our world actually literally moving within the galaxy, and a certain energy coming through, or radiation that's coming through, that's affecting all of us and all that's around us, causing this upgrade, if you will, or the surge of incoming energy or incoming light that's then affecting our DNA. And even as you're speaking of the resonance of the frequency and the attunement, it also made me think of what Oracle Girl spoke recently of the importance of tuning in and allowing that source connection or that connection to that incoming light, allowing it to come in, embody that and anchor it into our world, so that by doing that, we're actually then creating attunement to everyone and everything that's around us.
Right. So what part of that would you like me to address?
Anything that you can add to our current predicament, and as far as, because I know you're familiar with Kryon's work as well. So as far as maybe tying into what you've spoken of with regards to frequency and resonance and input of energy, from your point of view, as well as what Kryon has spoken about, or what Oracle Girl has spoken about on a very metaphysical level, but if you can kind of tie it into this current shift in consciousness from your point of view, from your understanding.
And maybe how that pulls in with DNA and the potentiation, because that's coming up lots of conversation around that, and it's kind of directly related. So maybe we can pull that into.
Sure. We'll have one comprehensive discussion, pulling all those threads together in one tidy package.
That's why we keep bringing you back. You're our tight package guy.
If anyone can articulate it, it's Dr. Todd.
It's true. Yeah. That's why we give you the hard questions.
I do appreciate that. Well, you might be aware, actually, for Lee's 12th book, which was about his idea of multidimensional or 12 dimensions of DNA, where I had the privilege of writing the foreword for that. It really ties many concepts together if we bring DNA into the construct. The overall Cryonic concept was that the magnetic grids of the Earth were created with the intention of being able to build a civilization of sentient beings of high consciousness, and that our DNA is responsive to magnetics. That's one of the core principles that I work with, that our DNA structurally is not just double helix, it's a double helix that then coils. So it's wrapped around a spool. So all of a sudden, it's not just a double helix, it's a supercoil. And then that further supercoils. You can have up to 7 levels of supercoiling in a cell. So you have coil within coil structures. It's been shown that there can be so-called ballistic transmission of electrons in DNA, which fundamentally is saying there can be potentially room temperature superconduction in DNA. So you can induce currents in DNA. And if you induce a current in a superconductive system, that current will remain unchanged unless you somehow alter or modify the system, which then gives us, even within our bodies, this whole process of antennas and receivers that are transmitting high level, high frequency electromagnetic information. And I think there's a subtler layer, that's the consciousness layer that's related to it, and which organizes all of that. And the seat of this electromagnetic activity in DNA is the magnetic grids of the Earth themselves. And Kryon has basically said that his purpose for being here is to make adjustments in the grids to support a higher state of consciousness. And the requirements for that, just from mechanics, would be altering the system so that the potential to hold energy is greater. And Kryon described what those changes in the fields would be, and they actually happened. He said magnetic north would change, and it did. He said that the Schumann resonance would change, and it did. He predicted certain celestial events like an asteroid just missing the Earth, which was supposed to actually hit it by the prophecies. And it did happen. It nearly missed the Earth, like by about 200,000 miles, less than the distance from the Earth to the moon. So we have this constellation of interrelationships between the magnetic grids and how it supports a couch of consciousness. Those grids have changed. So we have sort of the necessary part of a shift in the ability of the system to hold and work with energy and frequency. And then what you're describing is a type of infusion of energy, whether it's what he calls energy from the central sun or cosmic energy of a certain sort. If you have a system that has capacitors, that has the ability to store energy, you still need to fill it up. So once you shift the couch, once you shift the capacity to hold, if you restructure that system a little bit, you can alter the frequency that it will operate at, and then you need to fill it with energy. So all these principles you're talking about are literally recalibrating in a general way the capacity for a person living on the planet after these changes to function at a generally higher level.
Exciting, exciting.
Does that answer the question?
Brilliant.
And then brings up more questions, which is good discussion. You were talking, one thing I think would be really important to address would be just directly how things like light and sound are able to potentially directly influence DNA. Now, you talked about in one of the videos that I was watching with you, you were breaking down how a photon and basically looking at it with this electric and magnetic field and the certain spiral sort of formation that it takes place, and how that very much resembles the structure of DNA. Mm-hmm. And can you just explain that piece a little bit? Because I think sometimes these seem to be very subtle energies for people, but that these subtle energies can have a very direct impact on structure. And so I thought the way that you explained that was really it was a nice way for me to grab onto it in another perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go today?
Maybe not super deep for everybody, but just deep enough.
Well, what is fascinating and what gets into what I think is mind-blowing physics, even according to how conventional physicists describe the nature of our universe and the nature of space itself, is that what we're doing with laser light is, instead of the waves being in phase, which creates an amplified wave, which is the way lasers work across the spectrum, we have an optical invention that allows us to alter the path lengths of the photons. We can recombine the waves so that they are exactly out of phase. And when we do that, if you take a sine wave and shift it 180 degrees and add them together, peaks match with valleys, valleys match with peaks, nodes match with nodes, and you get a sum zero. You literally create a vector cancellation, both of the electric fields on one axis and the magnetic fields at right angles to that. So you have something completely different. You no longer really have two photons anymore. You have a system of structured potentials in the vacuum of space-time. And if you recall what you might have read about the so-called zero-point energy, what that means is that, astoundingly, from every single point in space, even in the vacuum of deep space, they're arising this almost unlimited, nearly infinite flow of virtual particles. And we don't see them because they don't cross a threshold that is characterized by delta E times delta T. If that product doesn't exceed a certain level that's conditioned again by Planck's constant, it doesn't become a visibly physical particle, it stays a virtual particle. But if you added up all the energy of those virtual particle fluxes and converted to physical energy, converted that to matter, the energy in a cubic inch of space would be converted to more matter in the known universe by orders of magnitude. So that's how much energy there is everywhere and all around us. And when we take these two photons and they're no longer fluctuating electric fields on one axis and magnetic fields, all of those vectors have exactly canceled each other. So there's no net electric field, no net magnetic field. In all likelihood, this goes way more deeply through matter than usual. Therapeutically, that part of the waveform that we use probably goes all the way through the body from one side to the other and creates informational field that attracts the stem cells to go there and stick there, or reshapes the arginine molecule like we were describing, depending upon how you tune the frequencies of the system. And we are literally, in a way, doing what would be called vacuum engineering of reality itself. Now, that is a long prelude to get to the specific question that you ask. In addition to a photon, a wave of light, having a fluctuating sine wave of electric energy and in phase magnetic energy, if the wave is coming towards you, it also goes through what's called a polarization cycle. So in one wavelength, it's gone through a full polarization cycle of 360 degrees. And when we combine the waves exactly out of phase, as you may recall from the discussion, we can again have the waves in phase, but they're going in opposite direction. So you still get the sum zero, but you have the wave anti-wave, and the anti-wave has the distinction that then we can also discuss the possibility of something called time reverse light, time forward light, time reverse light. And time reverse light does things like reverse entropy, which we could say would reverse aging in the body, for example. Now, if we look at it from the polarization state, what that then gives us is a spiral coming towards you, and the anti-wave is a spiral going away from you. And that is exactly mirroring the geometric structure of DNA itself, which is a spiral counter-spiral. And through the principle of resonance, if things have a similar geometric structure, they tend to have a similar natural frequency, and they tend to be in resonance with each other. So by virtue of this waveform relationship literally being like the double helix, which is a spiral counter spiral, we've created that out of light. So just by those geometric considerations, that light in that form, that electromagnetic energy in that form, would likely be in resonance with DNA. Now, if we go deep into esoteric, and I'll have to draw the line where we don't have any scientific instruments to verify this, it's simply esoteric information that you need to use your own inner wisdom to say whether it makes sense to you or not, that according to the information from Lee Carroll via Kryon in that book, he described a ninth dimension of DNA that he called the bridge layer, the bridge to enlightenment, the bridge to healing, the bridge to transformation. And then he commented, it might have been the book, it may have been in one of the events that happened in that time frame, that what our laser was doing by virtue of being in resonance with that system was directly activating that so-called ninth layer and creating a bridge between the strands for moving the vibration to a higher level.
Nice. Ergo, sort of the multidimensionality to the laser then.
Right. Going beyond 3D and 4D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you were talking about 0 point field, and I mean, it was interesting just talking to different guests within the series is really fascinating because they all have different perspectives on this.
Sure
And
they do.
we talked to RJ Spina, and one of the things that he was saying that I thought was really fascinating is he said, our DNA is designed to receive information directly from source, not from the egoic self. And so that when we are receiving information from the egoic self, it's going to create damage and disease and whatnot. And as we more and more download or inform our DNA with more of a direct connection to source, but however people perceive that, I think of that as maybe being more connected to pure love and some of those higher states of consciousness. But that then it's naturally receiving the information that it requires. So I'm wondering, when you were talking about 0 point field, I think of that kind of tied into the concepts of like torsion fields and scalar energy, and that usually those are then connected with intent. So most of the time that it seems that intent plays a role with how this information can be perceived. So when you're doing some of the work with the laser, is there intent brought into that as well? Or is it the intent just with the nature of what you're wanting to do that classifies as intent? Or I'm kind of curious about where the role of that can play into the work that you're doing, and with the ability to activate, potentiate, upgrade our DNA.
Very good question. And I don't usually talk about this aspect of it, and I will for you guys, that we are always working with consciousness with the laser. That we believe we're creating a field that's fundamental to a type of creative source energy. By virtue of structuring potentials in the vacuum, we're, in a sense, altering the way that the virtual particle fluxes may orient themselves, and literally changing the state of energy and or matter of the system that we're working with. And we can talk about consciousness a little bit more and how it works. We actually were given guidance when we do the work with how we create a photoacoustic signature that goes through tissue to attract stem cells. We were given the guidance, actually through Kryon, that until this is much, much further along, that we should only have licensed practitioners, primarily medical doctors, be the ones holding the laser, because they have a knowledge of the anatomy and the physiology and the layers of tissue that the beam is going through, almost like an internal MRI scanner in your awareness of what you're doing with tissue. And they also know what the state of the healthy tissue is. So in the mind, they can create this differential field between the state that it's at and the state you want it to become. Kind of like your idea of creating the love vibration, and you reset yourself at a higher level of function, that we always incorporate the principle of consciousness into the use of the laser. And my theory that you can put into the hopper is that beings like Sai Baba, who were able to manifest matter with thought, I mean, their descriptions, he would have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of devotees, and in a day he would just issue this holy ashes vibhuti from his hands and throw in a few gold rings with diamonds and his image on it and cool stuff like that. And there might be barrels of this holy ash collected. So the question is, if it wasn't just magic, and it'd be hard to magically, hold that much ash up his sleeves during the day, well, how did he do that? And what makes sense to me is that we can view consciousness as probably having a very high subtle vibration, probably higher than the frequencies we're generally talking about with light waves and other electromagnetic waves. And one would need to have a very balanced awareness so that those very high frequency waves in the brain would reach their balance point. Kind of as we create with the laser, the ability to align the waves out of phase or in certain phase relationships, that you're literally impressing that information onto the 0 point energy. And if you do that, in theory, you could create an almost unlimited amount of matter of whatever you wanted, depending upon how you altered the frequency and vibration to make whatever matter you wanted to make. So likewise, I view what we're doing with the laser as an amplifier of conscious intent. So it's quite important what a practitioner of the art is thinking, their state of awareness, and being in as balanced, neutral, and as high a calibration state as possible.
Sounds like the kind of technology they used in Star Trek with the replicators.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it would work when we get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, kind of joking, but not really joking.
No, I think that's actually the technological way, though there are lots of engineering steps to get from here to there, but I think we have a path for it.
Nice. We'll continue that conversation down the road here. I so enjoy these conversations, Dr. Todd. They're always so nurturing for my soul. I know we are coming up on time here, and I think we've talked about many of these things. I would love to just kind of hear from your perspective when you think about where healthcare can move, where the direction that would be really fitting a very full picture, holistic care that incorporates things like energy, frequency, vibration into the mix. What does that start to look like when you picture sort of your vision of where healthcare is and where we're moving towards? What would be part of that picture?
Well, since you asked, I would say our research group and a network of very smart, gifted, and visionary practitioners, we are actively working on, in a Buckminster Fuller sense, that idea of, rather than complaining about the existing model, simply create a new model that makes the old one obsolete. So we are working on taking all these principles. The flagship is the cellular medicine, the ability to awaken your dormant stem cells and literally not just do anti-aging, but literally turn back the aging clock to make you a younger, enhanced version of yourself. Because you get to maintain and keep all the wisdom while having a higher, more youthful, better functioning brain and body. And you can do that repeatedly. So the first step is overcoming the limitation of our physical longevity so we can be in youthful bodies of ever increasing wisdom and capacity. So it's the flagship in that sense, because it overcomes the lifespan and longevity issue, and then add everything else on top of it. The psycho-emotional medicine, the energy medicine, nutritional individualization to create an optimal program for each person based upon their individual genetics and SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms, those little things you get with 23andMe, diet, optimized lifestyle, use of the mind, the way one uses the mind for consciousness and awareness practices, whether it's meditation, yoga, and the various ways one can enhance the mind, psycho-emotional medicine, which is maybe in a way the ultimate key because it's relieving the unconscious blocks for us to move from one level to the next, and all the various forms of vibrational medicine, music medicine, tones and tonal patterns, the whole picture integrated and put together. And the core idea is that we can continually become enhanced versions of ourselves in every aspect of our lives, not just being unidimensional, that we only work on our career, we only work on our relationship, we only work on our spirituality. We can literally become enhanced versions of ourselves ongoingly, without limit, in every area, all the time.
Beautiful.
Well,
and you know what?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was actually thinking, because we're homeschooling our little ones right now.
Oh,
and
fun.
You speak of that. Yes, lots of fun. And you speak of
fun.
You speak of that vision of medicine, and I think that's going to be so all-encompassing, because that would be the only type of school that I would want to sign up our kids for, because I feel like anything less than that is actually stifling the brilliance of who they are. And if once especially these past few years, we've spent so much time indoors, outdoors, every day, day and night with our kids, and when we kind of let go the fact that they have to be in a structure away from us, and we kind of tune into their questions and their curiosities and their imagination and their visions, we're realizing more and more that they come in with so much brilliance of their own. They come in with so many grand visions of their own, that all they really need is the playground within which they can be nurtured and supported, so that they can create what they came here to do. And what you're speaking of, what the Indigenous community have referred to as mystery schools, these are the type of, these are the only type of, schooling or learning opportunities I would want to sign up our kids to.
Awesome. I completely support that idea that we can enter a new realm where people really are supported in their visions, as opposed to having to go through having them stuffed in a box and have to somehow figure out how to get them back out of the box. Yeah, I think it's great.
Well, and if we're able to start living closer to like 969 or so, then we're going to have lots of time to be able to keep working on that.
Absolutely.
I think it really interesting right now, because I know with the work that I'd studied with Dr. Hawkins, and when you talked about the scale of consciousness, and you would say that essentially that our bodies, given the nervous system, were able to hold a maximum amount of about 1,000, like on his scale. That was sort of the amount of energy the body, the physical vessel, could hold. And anything outside of that would kind of blow it out of the water, so to speak. And I'm really curious with what's going on right now, if all of that's going to shift, and what our potential is, because it does seem like the vessel is going through physical upgrades, that there may be the ability beyond what we've known previously, and even very, very limited amount of people have traveled up that scale. But I'm curious to see what's possible.
Or even as you, Dr. Todd, were speaking earlier about the possibility, if it's not able to hold a certain resonance, then it's going to explode. I feel like that's going on in a grand scale right now, whether individuals, like on a physical level, or the earth itself, and all these volcanic eruptions that are taking place around the world.
It's a sophisticated question that you ask, and I believe that it is the case that we're constantly evolving. We're evolving in awareness, we're evolving in conscious capacity. And primarily, I believe, as we evolve the consciousness piece, we can, as long as we don't force our body to do something before it's really ready to, like force a Kundalini experience before it's really ready for it, that we can progressively build the body so it can hold a higher frequency. We can detoxify the body. We can clear the unconscious emotional blocks that might not allow us to move to the next level, that might be blocking, like constantly embodying the love vibration, because there's been some traumatic experience that we have to clear, integrate, release the emotion of, and get that part of our brain back as well. I do believe that our physical vehicle is evolving in parallel with the consciousness capability. and that, how you say, upper limit that David Hawkins put on the scale will be transcended. I believe even in subsequent books, he said that already there are people that had gotten to 1200. So he's already saying that it's possible, and I believe we're talking about the dynamic where it can become possible to raise the general ambiance of the calibration state of humanity, and then have a group that goes beyond what has been the peak consciousness capability before.
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting. Now, one final question for you before we find out where people can learn more about your information that you're doing is, you had mentioned a little while ago in one of your interviews, you had talked about doing training with a specific grandmaster. And I'm wondering if there's anything around that you could share. That's more of our own personal curiosity. But
we thought you were the grandmaster.
Yeah. Oh, he's training with a grandmaster.
I've become his protege. That kind of counts.
I thought that was fascinating. And if that's something you're comfortable talking about, I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
I'd be honored to share a bit about that. It's an amazing story. His name is Dr. Barry Margulin. He was a high-level academic specialist in gastroenterology at UCLA, was involved in developing the technology of endoscopy and various related GI procedures so people could have their GI problems corrected without needing invasive surgery. And he had the passion for having a better way of medicine where people never have to get sick at all in the first place. And that took him all around the world till he finally found authentic grandmasters in China, saw amazing healing, witnessed stuff like you see in movies, but it's actually real. And eventually was allowed to train with them and was a very good student and ultimately initiated as a grandmaster, and has been the first person in a 5,000-year unbroken lineage of grandmasters going back to Lao Tzu, the first and only person allowed to leave China to teach that information to the rest of the world. And I've been working with him very intensively, almost every day, actually. And as you recall, I shared some of the music with you, including the first symphony that I wrote with many layers of instruments and vocals that is quite vibrationally enhancing. And that was inspired by my first energy initiation with him. I woke 3 days after that process, which is, so it's very detailed. It's like 38 pages of instruction of how to receive this initiation and make the most of it, what to do before, the day of, and the days after. And so it was like almost being in a pure meditative state for 2 days. And the morning of the third day, I woke at my birth time exactly, 5:33 a.m., hearing a symphony. Then I heard the vocal part first, the whole piano section, then the whole violin section, then the flute, and now it's almost a completed symphony. We're going to add one more choral part to make it 100% complete, but it's probably 98% there. And then I actually am now, with further discussion with him, probably going to create a full 4-movement symphony. So what you have in hand is the first of 4 movements of what is provisionally going to be called the Ever-Living Symphony.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful.
And working with him, the core principle, and you really touched upon this, Taya, earlier in our talk, which is this concept of source energy. So the whole system that he's doing is about various ways of using your mind and intention, breathing exercises, meditation, physical exercises, and ways of understanding that are about literally drawing on source energy. I mean, his system, he calls it EFS, or Energy for Success. You can look him up or that up. I'm in the 14th training module after 10 months. So I'm a little bit ahead of schedule there, and really love all the information and the practices. And he transmits these many healing vibrations. He says 256 of them just by listening to the training materials. or doing the practices. And I'm finding that this idea of literally in every moment making the decision that you're going to be an attractive field for source energy, that you're going to bring it into your being, that energy and awareness is going to allow you to be alert and aware, perceive your environment, and make optimum decisions and choices from day to day, enhance all your relationships, build all of your capabilities in all the areas of your life. I find it to be a very good system that almost anyone could use or benefit from. And kind of the physical representation of that is having written my first symphony with many instruments. I've written symphonies for voice since 2012, but actually creating a composition of instruments was new, and that really is a byproduct. There's much more than that in the expansion of my work, the scientific validation we have of turning back the biological aging clock, the connections we're making. It all seems to be growing just by this idea. And I'll use his terminology, which is you can either be in the matrix, which is kind of after the movie that we all enjoyed with Neo and Trinity. And in the matrix, the system is designed to confuse you, to disrupt you, to make you think you're small, to think you don't have solutions, to think that you should just kind of go with whatever happens, versus being in the energy, where it's quite different. And you don't just get the energy, you have to reach for it. That's the key. Like if you go to default, the matrix takes over your life, and it'll generally be quite unsuccessful. Or you can consciously decide to be in the energy, but it's not passive. You have to like intentionally reach for it, grab for it, work with it, embody it, write goals every day, write down your wins every day to anchor it. And if you do that, and the more you do it, the more you like stay in the energy versus getting yourself lulled or pulled into the matrix, that the same things just get better and better and better and better and better. It's pretty cool stuff.
That's so neat. It really makes me think of what our friend Lemurian shaman speaks of as light in action, where it's not about complacency, it's not about sitting in meditation and doing nothing, but it's literally reaching for it and moving towards that which you're getting inspired by.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that, Dr. Todd. And I was actually wondering if that was who the Grandmaster was that you were working with. I remember coming across Dr. Berry's work years back through, I think originally I came across it through Bulletproof Radio, because I think with Dave Asprey works with Dave Asprey and stuff like that too. So I was curious about that. Yeah, I've looked into some of the stuff and it looks fascinating. So I look forward to talking to you more about that another time. Dr. Todd, just to add it to the ongoing list, where can people learn more about all of the work that you're doing, the supplement line, the pineal tones? I mean, you've got so many different pieces, and we'll put all those links in the show notes for you.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we have created a landing page for you, which is drtoddo.com/inspire. So it celebrates our talking today. And I've been providing the book I've written called Growing Younger, which is about our clinical trials we've done with various of these photoacoustically enhanced supplement preparations, which have created significant age reversal effects. And also the Victory Song, which like gets into the pineal tones side of things. And also for your interest, on Sunday, I just finished recording in HD the third of 4 training modules for the next choir that's happening in Maui. Yay. So the pineal tone system, which is a way of expanding awareness and consciousness and awakening dormant DNA, that will be gathering, we expect, over 1,000 choristers on 11/11/22 to create a profound state of consciousness shift in the participants and for the planet. I have done 3 of the 4 training videos for that. So that's going to be ready to be released soon. So people are interested in the pineal tones. It's simply pinealtones.com. The Victory Songs that you can download is our last finale piece from the choir we did in Bulgaria, the Wisdom Choir. And it's the song that a civilization sings when we go from duality consciousness to unity consciousness. So basically, it puts people in a state, like if you talk about going to the love vibration and how that shifts everything around it, imagine going into the vibration of a whole enlightened planet and what that feels like. And by in that feeling, you actually start making it happen for a whole civilization sooner rather than later. So I encourage people to get it, listen to it, sing along, and that will be like a planetary time machine to bring our enlightened state sooner rather than later. And if people want more information, it's simply pinealtones.com. And then for the supplements, it's gematria.com. And that's an old word going back to the mystery schools, as you're probably aware, which is the art of converting letters into numbers and decoding the information that's in the pattern of the numbers. So it's about transforming energy and information into one form to another. So that's what gematria is about. And all the supplements are photoacoustically enhanced, which at least in agriculture can make them work at as much as 2 to 5 times more and grow bigger plants that are sweeter and more nutrient dense and higher vibrational and rejuvenative and really good for you. And then finally, for those interested in psycho-emotional medicine, relieving those unconscious conflicts, which may create issues in health and also be blocks to our full use of our brain, which we want more and more use of, is called mindbodylogic.com.
That's it.
It's just so amazing. Like, honestly, just to think of all these different array of insights and information and experiences that you have is mind-boggling. It's brilliant. It's amazing.
Well, and when we for the time being relocated out to Mexico here for a little while, some of the main things I did take with me among some other stuff was I did bring my Methuselah Life and my Gem Aminos. So those were part of my my regime.
That's awesome. Yeah, the original brain enhancement formula and the longevity formula.
Yeah.
Very good combination.
And we will also put in the links of the previous 2 episodes that we had with Dr. Todd. So for those of you who want to
get more of Dr. Todd.
Yes, there's definitely a lot more. And we'll be bringing more of him to you as well through future talks that we have. Dr. Todd, I did want to ask you a last question before we wrap up the show. And that's, how are you feeling about where we are currently as a humanity? Are you optimistic about the future of humanity?
Yeah, I believe that's why we're here now. And if we look around, we are, I would say, at a cusp, which means that for 2 years, we've been subjected to a pandemic that has many questions about it, origin-wise, science-wise, interventions-wise, that creates a whole cloud of really, who are we as a species? Are we driven by the truth of the situation or just what certain forces wanted to be and experience? And my sense is that that is going to be a catalyst. And it'll be a catalyst, at least in my ideal, that we as a civilization decide that we really desire the truth, that our goal is to have good sources of information that we can rely on as speaking the truth, that are intended for our best health, evolution, and awareness. And that there'll be a pendulum swing back in that direction that can then be released with a whole multitude of consciousness and awareness expansion technologies that are being released and revealed. Some of the ones that I'm working with and my colleagues are working with that are as scientifically sophisticated as awakening newborn caliber stem cells with subtle DNA informational frequencies, which is our core rejuvenation work, to the work with pineal tones that creates a whole consciousness field that can awaken the epigenetics and call to you, your soul records, and your mission and vision and purpose, and create a whole vibrational state for yourself and beyond, to many other awareness and vibrational technology, including the work that we spoke of with Dr. Barry McGulan and Energy for Success, that I would recommend to anyone who wants a systematic way to choose being in the energy versus being in the matrix. And that this is the cusp. I believe we either go down the dark road of a totalitarian world that we probably don't idealize or really even care to be in for us or our offspring and descendants, versus going in the direction of a truly enlightened planet, which, it'll take time and generational processes, but it'll be a movement in that direction that we can progressively move towards. And I believe progressively boost, in the Hawkins sense, the calibration state of the whole civilization, until we cross a threshold that will literally be in a whole different field of consciousness and awareness, and not just a peaceful planet, but an enlightened planet. I believe also a high-tech, very well-connected planet.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful vision for everybody. And we look forward to being a part of that with you, Dr. Todd. So, in closing, don't be a part of the matrix.
That is a perfect synchronicity that you had that footage. That is perfect.
I thought that would be fun. If you
that's awesome.
The YouTube video, what we just put on. So, all right, guys, that is a wrap. Dr. Todd, we love you so much. Thank you so much for everything. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Great speaking. Thank you.